let's go ahead and talk about it. Cool. So, computer keeps on going to sleep. Okay. So just a quick introduction, just React. React is a JavaScript library that's really used for building user interfaces. So it's really for our UI. We can kind of see this, and we have seen this as the V layer of MVC. So React was created to kind of be that view layer. We'll actually see in the coming weeks, we're actually going to use some frameworks or some things that allow us to React to kind of implement its own MVC architecture, where we're going to have like something that's called like React Router that's going to give us, we're going to do routes in React, and then we'll talk about like more, we're going to talk about state today, but then there's some more complicated state management where that really kind of becomes your model. It's a different, it's not going to be the same as like Rails MVC. It's like their own flavor of it. So, but we're not going to do that today. Today, we're just going to look, we're not even going to use Rails today. We're just going to look at React and just this view aspect of it. So yeah, before we start with React, it's good to know some basic HTML and CSS. It's good to know basic JavaScript. I mean, React is obvious, it's written in JavaScript, so we're going to need to know that, and we're going to get really good with JavaScript by writing React. We need to kind of understand, not really, but like what the DOM is, and all the DOM is, if I inspect this element, and I'm looking at like the HTML, like this is kind of the DOM. The DOM is this tree-like structure, which is HTML. You kind of see how this is like a tree because you have all these like nested children of these nodes. Like I have a body node and it has all these childrens. It has this div children. If I look at that, then that has like this SVG. So I could really look at like this structure of, HTML DOM tree.
What does it stand for?
Document Object Model. And yeah, it kind of looks something like this. If we had like a really simple web page, this would be like an HTML tag, and then we have the header tag, and then within the body tag, we have like an A tag. And that A tag would have some text that would be a link. It would have an attribute, which would be the href. So it's really just essentially the HTML. And what React does, React creates what's called a virtual DOM. And it's not that as we're learning about React, we don't really need to know this right off the bat, but the virtual DOM is just kind of this, React creates not the actual one, but it just creates this thing in like, the coding in code. And React is able to like switch these elements out and manipulate this virtual DOM really efficiently. So, but we're not going to like actually like see that. It's just kind of behind the scenes. Cool. Yeah, familiarity with ES6 syntax and features. So we did that yesterday. We spent a lot of time with ES6 and ES6 plus. So you might hear me call it like ES6 plus or ES6 next, just because it's, this version is now just continuously getting bumped. And we need Node.js installed, which we should have. So yeah, JavaScript. What is React? So React is probably one of the most popular libraries out there in use. It's probably the most popular JavaScript library, or close to it. It's built by Facebook, which is kind of nice because Facebook is like $1 trillion company. And isn't that crazy? Like Facebook's like literally worth $1 trillion. That's insane. Like anyway, so they have the resources to maintain it. And they're also, Facebook also uses React. So it's like they have an interest in maintaining it. And so many other people use React. So it's like you're going to be able to find, tons of references and resources for React. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. React's, even if something, 10 times greater came out than React today, like React would still be around for like 10 years because it kind of takes a while for things to die in this field. But React's definitely going to be around. There's other things like there's React Native. So if you know how to do React, so React is for the web. It's how to do UIs for the web. But Facebook also created this language called React Native, which is different than React, but it goes off of the same principles. So if you know React Native, you can then do mobile development. So you can write, and React Native works for both iOS and Android. Normally, if you're doing native development, you would have two separate projects. You would have one for iOS phones and one for Android phones. And because they're two separate languages. iOS is like Swift and Objective-C. Android's going to be like Java and Kotlin. So you'd have two completely separate projects. React Native allows you to just write in React, and then that can compile down into Objective-C and Java. So you can write these mobile applications in React and JavaScript. So it is different than the web stuff, obviously, because the web works with browsers, but React has this the kind of idea you learn once, write anywhere. So you would still have like a browser app, that'd be a React app, and then you'd have like a React Native app, which they'd be two separate apps. But if you know how to write React, learning React Native, it's pretty simple. It's like 80% the same. There's definitely some differences, but it's more similar than it is different. Yeah, so what makes React so popular is our ability to create components. So we can think of components as, we can write components as functions, but so we can think of these as like little reusable HTML elements, like these kind of small little building blocks that we can put like a lot of our code in. It's kind of like creating a function where you write the function once, you can do all the logic in the function, and then you reuse the function. So with components, it's like we write that component once, give it a whole bunch of functionality, and then we can easily reuse it. And then we can build components with components and build applications with this. And there's other solutions out there, such as like Angular and Vue. Those are the other two popular front-end JavaScript libraries that are different than React, but they're all the same in that they have this idea of creating components. Like you can create components with them. And they're all going to have this concept of like state. I'm trying to think if they have, I know Vue has like props concept, but can't remember with Angular, but there is this idea of state. And you can think of state as how your application is going to change throughout time. If I have a web page, I'm scrolling, like I might be I'm like changing the view. So I could like hover over this, I could click on that button, that's going to change the state. I might have a form where I can like enter input. So my component or my website can have this state associated. So think about state as stuff that's going to change. Think about props as really, so if we're thinking about components as functions, which they can be, You can think about props as the arguments that you're passing to the function. So you pass props to a component, just like you pass arguments to a function. And then state is different in the fact state is this thing that within your function might change. And we'll see examples of both of these today. Yeah, so let's just go ahead and get started with the demo. So for this, yeah, come into your, wherever you want to build your project. So for me, that's going to be week 3. And we're going to run this command, yarn create React app. And then we give it the name of whatever we want to call it. This is a lot like the Rails new command, where we're creating a new Rails project. This one's just a React project. And then I'm just going to call this project like React demo. Go ahead and hit enter. Yarn create, what am I getting an error for? Try using, does it not like this?
It
Oh, I
looks
might
like you
have
have one
You already
same
created
name.
that.
Yeah, I think it looks like I already have that. React, yo. React demo, yo. There we go. This one builds. This takes a second. This is actually going up. This is like downloading a whole bunch of crap that, well, not crap, but stuff we need. It's like downloading all of these JavaScript packages for React and everything that React relies on. So
What was the
takes a
first
second.
thing you said? Yarn create what? I didn't see the.
Yeah, it's yarn create React, yarn space create React app, and then the name. I can slack that out.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so now that that's done, I just CD into that project. And notice here, just to show you, we have, just like Rails, this gives us a Git repository already for us. So we don't need to do the Git init. This gives us a Git repository. So I can do a Git status just to show. Oh, looks like it's already committed. So I don't need to do a git add git commit. So I can do open this up in code dot.
What's the yarn start for?
That we'll see. That's going to actually start up our React server. So when we want to like see this on the browser.
Oh, like the Rails S.
Yeah, it's like Rails S.
Okay.
And we don't, for now, we don't need to know any. That's the only one we're going to need. We can ignore these other commands for now. But let's look at the folder structure really quick. You might not see the node mod. Oh wow, that's weird. You might not see the node modules folder. This is a hidden folder. This is where like, this is why it kind of took a second for this to download. This is like all the stuff we're using. It's like crazy how much like stuff is in here. So here's all like those JavaScript files that this app needs to run. We have like a yarn lock. We don't need, we have this, I want to look at this package JSON. This is similar to the gem file where we're keeping track of what packages we need for this project. So you can, and we'll look at this, how we add stuff to this later, but this is just kind of showing hey, this is where we, you know, like have React, we have React DOM. So this is where we add libraries that we're using. We have this public folder, which has our index.html. Now we're not going to do really anything with this page. If you need to add like a link to like Google fonts, like you would in the header, or you want to add something to the header, this is where you would do it. But here's our one div ID equals root. And we're not going to do anything in this HTML file. So we're not going to do much in this public folder, but that is where, this is like the actual web page, the HTML file that ultimately will get rendered. But if we go to the source folder, this is where you're going to be doing like, you're going to be like the majority of the time. This all starts with the index.js. So we do some React stuff here. We use this React DOM component or object to render, and we're going to see this app component in 1 second, but we're using this React DOM to render essentially our app to the document. So when I talked about the document object model, this document is that. And this document can get element by ID, root. We look back at the index.html, there's that div. So grab this element and then render the app component. So this is where we go from like React to our HTML, which we're really not going to, I mean, I just kind of want to show this. It's not super important at this time. But this is where I just kind of want to show, this is where like our app that we're going to look at, this is where this kind of gets used. We can also like import here, like notice an index.css files getting imported. So notice this one does need an extension. So our app is actually an app.js file. We don't need to include the extension if it's a JavaScript file, just because by default we're in a JavaScript file, so it's going to assume that's a JavaScript file if we don't have the extension. So if you want to import something like a CSS file, well, that we do need to say, hey, this is a CSS file. So if you want to do some CSS stuff, you can do it in your index.css. Okay. So here's our app.js. I am going to go ahead. Let's just delete this and just write this out from scratch.
Should we delete all that too?
Yeah, if you want to follow along. So let's just come in and write a simple little React component. App component here. And then we can export default this. So yeah, now I want to see this app component. So I'm going to go ahead and split a pane on here. So like Command-Shift-D in my terminal. And yeah, to run this, since we're not using Rails, I can run yarn start, but I need to make sure I'm in the React directory. Now this is also going to load it on localhost 3000. So I think if you have a Rails server, it might ask you if you want to run it on like 3001, or you can quit your Rails server to run it on localhost 3000, because you can't run them on the same port. So you can't have like your Rails server on port 3000 and your React server on port 3000. But there we go. There's my React app. I'm going to, I want to make these on the same page so I don't have to like keep scrolling back and forth. Okay. How do I get rid of this window? I should know this. Does anyone know? Why is this so hard?
Command B.
Control B.
Command B, cool, thank you. All right, I need to, man, I had all this VS Code stuff memorized, and now I've like forgotten it. Okay, anyway, thank you. Sweet, so now we have our React app. Something that's nice about developing with React and this create React app helper that we had, watch, I'm gonna just like make a change, I'm gonna save it. I didn't need to even refresh my web browser, and I see that change. So this is hot reloading. It's as I have my server running, it's going to look for changes in my file, and then as I save them, it then applies the changes. So it's not like Rails, when you make a change to your React file, you have to go back, you have to hit refresh, which takes like 2 seconds. This is just going to be a lot quicker. We should also maybe start getting some better errors. A little more readable. So if I come in here and misspell something, like line 116, PP is not defined. Anyway, sorry. So like if I misspell something, then it pops up quicker. And to me, it's a little cleaner than the lovely Rails React errors you get. A lot of the time. Sometimes their JavaScript errors can still be a little harder to find than some of those Rails errors.
I'm sorry, I missed what you typed into terminal that started your server. What was it?
Yeah, and just like the same thing with Rails, to stop your server is Control C. So if you ever need to stop your server, it's Control C, but to start it, it's yarn start.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to do React S and it was not working.
React S. That should work. Cool. So there's the app. All right, so let's get into it. We're just gonna start with a pretty simple component, we've kind of done this, but we're gonna start with a counter. And something else I'm gonna say, so we're doing our components as, they're called functional components, meaning we're just writing our components as functions. There's another way to write them as classes, and we haven't talked about classes yet, so I'm just going to not do that at all for now. So you might see examples of components, online, that looks something like this. So for now, we're just going to ignore that. And if you're looking at an example on like Stack Overflow that's using a class component, it might confuse you more than it helps you.
What is a class component again?
Well, we haven't really talked about classes. Well, class is it's just a different way. It's a component that is built using a class instead of a function. So they're both going to behave the same, but one's a function, one's a class. So I don't want to talk about the difference yet, because we'll just go into functional components. Then once we have a good understanding what that is, then we'll talk about classes and talk about class components. But you can do the same things with, like, both of them work. And functional components are kind of the new preferred way to do it. So I'm going to do this. I don't want to do this here in my app. I kind of want to keep this app component clean. So let's go ahead and create another React component. So I'm just going to do this in terminal. Actually, I'll just do this here. So I want to do this in my source folder. So I'm going to make sure I touch, let's call this uppercase counter.js. It's just convention for our components that we name them with an uppercase letter. And yeah. So there I've just created in my source folder, just a counter.js component. So we can go ahead and open that. Go ahead and just write this one. This is going to be a functional, just once again, this is just, see, it's a JavaScript function. That's all that is. And return div each one counter. And we export default counter. And let's take a quick second to talk about this export statement and import, just how this is working. So let's say I have another variable called like, I don't know, color. Let's have some const here. It's a color. And I want to export this. I can export this color. Maybe this can be like alert color. And this can be like success color. I just have some, I have more than one variables that I want to export. So I can export alert color. And I can export. Actually, I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to do this right here. Export const. Export const. So this default keyword, this is JavaScript. This has not, I mean, this is just a JavaScript thing. A JavaScript file can export one thing that like a default export. There can only be one default export. You can have as many exports as you want, but only one default. So let's come into our app.js. So I can import the counter. So my default import, I just can import it. And my anything else that's imported, I do in curly brackets. So that exports the alert color and it exports the primary color variable. Is that what I called it?
Success, I think.
Success, and I spelled that wrong. Okay. So that's how I would import those, not the default exports, and here's how I import the default one. So then I can like, just to show this working, like alert color, and then I can grab my counter component.
Is it from React on to the left of that, or to the right of it?
No, this is from the
Oh,
file.
okay.
So this,
Okay.
that's from the relative path. So let's look at that really quick. Let's say like I have a folder in here. And then inside of there, there's another folder. And then inside of, oh man, yeah, it does that. Let's do this. New file here.js. In here.js. Okay. So here I just have a variable export const thing, and thing is just the string thing, but it's in my source folder, in my test.io folder, in this Y folder. So if I want to import thing in my app.js, I'm going to import. So this is not a default export, so I need the curly brackets. Then I give it the name thing, and then from, and now I got to give it the relative path. So I say, hey, start in the folder I'm at. That's the /. Then go to the test.io folder, and then go to the Y folder. Or is this already? Oh, this is text. Man, this X thing is, I hate how this does this. Delete this. Okay, there we go. Sorry. The UI in here was kind of a little confusing. So I go to the test.io folder. Now I need to go to the Y folder. And then go to here.js. So that's how you navigate through that. There's also like a nice little helper with React. If I start typing the thing, sometimes like I can get this to pop up. And if I hit tab, it will auto import it. So that can be helpful. Or you can just give it the actual relative path. And why is my app not refreshing? Did I stop my server? Oh, yeah. So there it is. There's my color red. There's that string thing, and there's my counter component. So I'm going to get rid of this stuff just to keep this cleaner. These two things.
Can I see the counter again really quick?
Yeah, and I'll select this one out as is. And here's the counter. Okay. All right. So yeah, let's go back to the counter. So here we're rendering the counter component in my app component. So let's go back to this counter component. And I actually want this to have like a count here. Like we're going to keep track of this count. Like I want to like press a button and have this go up and down. So I want like a button. So we'll have like an add. And then we'll have like a minus. So I can put like a click handler on these. I can put a click handler on pretty much any element. And in React, it's just called this on click. And then we can pass this a callback function. So this on click, we can give it a value of a callback function that will be called when this thing is clicked. So let's go ahead and create a function called like increment. Now, see, now I'm getting an error. Increment is not defined. I need to go ahead and define const increment. So this is just another function. Now now this function's defined, so I shouldn't have that error. Cool. You can go ahead and do like a console.log clicked. Inspect my element. this can be a good step as you're learning to like do React and JavaScript and you're working with these events, is just maybe like a small step is just see, hey, do you have that click event handled? Because now when I hit this add, it's at least logging clicked. So now I know this click event is hooked up to this function. So yeah, I want this counter to change. I want this to be able to go from like 1, 2, 3 and down. So I want this to change. So when we think about change, what word should come up? State.
State.
State. Yeah, this count, it has state, right? It could be 0, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be a million. It's a counter, it changes, it has state. And to do state with a functional component, we have to use the use state hook. So I import that from React and see, this is just this would not be a default export, this would just be a export. And this is a function, use state is a function. And so this is just the general stuff about use state. So use state returns, let's just be really exact, returns a array. It's kind of the first thing in the array is the state. The second thing is the way to change the state or to set the state.
Where's the array? Is it?
We haven't used it yet, so we need to create this. We're going to use this.
Okay.
It returns in an array. All right, so, and also set state takes one argument, which is the default state. So let's see this as like what that actually looks like. So if we're doing like a counter, I'm just going to name this like count and set count. And this equals use state. And then I want to set my initial state to 0. So we have actually not seen this exact same, this kind of syntax. Right? This const count, set count. Let's go in and kind of see what's going on here. So let's say I have an array, because it's kind of weird. Like, why does this function return in an array? And it's returning an array of some like random data and then away in a function. It's like, why not return an object? But let's look at that. So let's say I come in here and I have an array, like let's just do num. Let's just say num equals 1 and 2. So there's my array. And then I can say const. And I'm going to use this syntax I did on line 9. Const x and y equals num. So if I do x is 1, y is 2. So I mean, I could write this as like, like thing, and then const set or count equals thing at the 0 index and set count as thing at the second thing in the array. Because useState returns in an array. The first thing in it is going to be the state. The second thing is going to be that thing to set the state. But I'm going to use ES6, like I did in here, to just make this a little cleaner, to grab those things off of the array.
When you say set state, are you saying like the new state? Like count is the original state and then set count is the new one?
Yeah,
Or how you move to the new one?
another way to think about this is its useState is giving us a getter and a setter. So the getter is the way to get the value of the state. The setter is the way to set that value. And then this thing we put in it when we call the function, that's going to be the default value. That's like what it's going to start out as. So I'm saying, hey, let's create this count state and let's set it equal to 0 by default. So count is going to be, let's look at that. See, now I'm using the count variable here, that 0. If I do yo-yo, count is now the string yo-yo. That's what it's going to start off as. Let's say, hey, start off as an array. Cool. That's an array. So we can have it be any kind of data. I want to do a counter. I think I want this to start off 0 because that makes sense. That's why I'm setting that to 0. This is a little more like advanced question, but why do you think that like the people at React decided for this function to return in an array and not say a object?
Because maybe you can change it by like the index, I guess, like either 1 or 2, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, this first one's always going to be the state. This one's always going to be the setter. Because we could, let's pretend that it returned an object. And maybe the key here was like state. And the key here was set state. And the reason why, because if it returns an object, then we kind of be stuck with these names of like whatever they decided to call the keys, which I think a good name would be like state and set state. But then those are kind of ambiguous names. Since they return in an array, we can call these whatever we want. Because it's just going to get the first thing in the array. And we're going to see we can use state multiple times in our component. So maybe we have like a count state and maybe we have like user state. So I can just easily reuse that. Like since it's an array, I can rename these variables and I'm not going to have naming conflicts. Anyway. Okay, so now I have a way to set the state. This is the set count. So in my increment function, I can go ahead and I have a way to get the value of my state. So I'm going to take whatever my current value of count is, and I'm just going to add 1 to it. Now, when I click that add button, it changes.
Could you also do count plus equals?
Is this going to work? No. Well, so this is saying, what this is saying is, hey, I'm trying to change my count, but I declared it as a const. Remember in JavaScript, we can't change constants. So if I switch this to a let, let's see if that works. That is working, but this goes back to kind of what we talked about yesterday, where we don't want to change this count. So this works, but that's kind of like not the way we want to do it, because React might not like that. So if I make this a const, which I should, like count shouldn't change. Or what I should better say is I should only let set count change count. And so if I do it like that, now count's not changing. I mean, it is because, but set count's going to change it. So that's a good question. That's a kind of small distinction. But now I have, so here's how I know count is not changing, like within my app, or like that I'm doing it and only React is doing it, is when I hit the add, I'm not getting that error. It's a const, so it's not changing. But yeah, if I do plus equals 1, that is actually going to try to change the value of count right here. So then we get that error. Cool, so let's do our minus. So I'm just going to show you a different way that I could do this minus as a anonymous function. Because really there's not that much going on right here in this function. So I could just kind of throw this right here, this logic here, set count, count -1. Do I have a syntax error somewhere? Okay. I'm getting this error now. Too many re-renders. React limits the numbers of renders to prevent an infinite loop. So let me tell you this. Every time you call this function, this from useState, the setter function, it's going to if you change your state, it's going to re-render your app, which essentially calls your function again. So I'm in an infinite loop right now. And well, it stopped, it prevented it said, hey, you're trying to do this too much time, you're in an infinite loop. So it gives me an error. So why am I getting this? Any ideas?
For the anonymous function, don't you need to write it with the arrow notation?
Yeah, because this function, this set count, when it renders, it's actually getting called. And what I'm doing then is I'm going to change the state, which is going to trigger this to get re-rendered, which is going to call this function, and it's going to change its count to like -2. And then it gets re-rendered. And that cycle goes on forever until we get this error. So yeah, I don't want this function to be called, so I need to wrap it in an anonymous function that returns it. Now that's not called, and it waits until I actually click the button. And then when I click the button, it actually gets called. So the nice thing, we talked about this yesterday, the nice thing about it is you will catch this pretty quick because it'll just break if you try to do something like this. Because you'll get into an infinite loop. Sometimes if you get yourself into an infinite loop like that, and sometimes just in general with React, you might want to try just restarting your server. That's always just a general good rule. Even with Rails, I think that's a good rule. If you're like stuck on a bug and it's just, you think it should be working, just to be safe, go restart your server. So yeah, any questions on that? On state or any of this?
So the set count. I'm trying to understand exactly what that is. I still,
Yeah, this is just a function that React gives us back, that gives us a way to change this state. And it also has the effect of when we call this function, it's
Mhm.
going to trigger our UI to like re-render. So not only is it changing the count from like 1 to 2 to 3, it's actually triggering this component to render onto the web page. So that's how we get our website to change. Because if you don't know JavaScript and you want to do a counter, like how are you going to do that? Because you just render your HTML page and then it's just kind of there. JavaScript was invented because it can go into the DOM and it can change things up. So JavaScript's really good at that, and React is just another layer on top of that that makes it a lot easier. So we have one counter right here. But we can go to our app. So now that we've created this one component, well, now I can reuse it as many times as I want.
Mhm.
So now I have 5 counters. Now they each maintain their own state of that count. So they each have that count state and that set counter that corresponds to that component. So they now all have keeping track of that, which is pretty nice. So that's state. We haven't talked about props yet. I'm gonna just delete these for now. Let's just stick with 1. Or let's do 2. Because let's say I want these counters to have, I don't know, different headers. Like I don't want this to say counter. I want this to say like stuff. Maybe this is like a voting app. Like, I don't know, like Nick Jonas, like counter app. So I want this one to say like Nick Jonas, and then I want this one to say someone else. Give me a name.
Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber. Yeah, let's do Nick Jonas, Justin Bieber. See who's better. Team Edward, Team Shakeup. Okay. So yeah, so I want this like name or like, so this is where I'm going to get into props. I want, and think about functions of an argument. Like I want to be able to pass different values to these, but maybe I both want them to have a header. So let's just, I'm going to come up with this name. I don't like Teen Crush. I'm coming up with that name, whatever. Like that's the name of the prop. Did I spell crush right? Oh man. Anyway, this is the name of the prop. I'm calling it Teen Crush, and this one's going to be already Nick Jonas. And then this counter, I want to give it that same prop name, but a different value. So now I want to grab these values, and I'm going to do that through props. So now my counter, I'm just going to call this X, and then let's just console.log X.
Huh.
And see, both of these are getting past a object. This one's just getting past an object, Teen Crush, Nick Jonas. This one's getting past an object, Teen Crush, J Beeb. And there's really, I can just kind of pass in whatever props I want. I could do, I don't know, like yo equals whatever. So now if I re-render this, this component's, the X has an object that has the key Teen Crush, which is Nick Jonas, and the key yo, which is whatever. And the other component doesn't have that whatever, because I didn't pass it. So my counter, this is just a parameter, a function parameter, and I'm calling it X. What we're going to see it called is props. I'm going to just call that props because that's just what it is. And then that's a object. So I can destructure keys from it. So we have a team. That's not how you spell crush, is it? That looks so wrong. Is it crush? That's right. Okay, there we go. So I can grab that teen crush key out of there and yo from props. I mean, I can try to grab something that's like really not in there, so not in props. I just made that up. This is just going to be undefined because like none of my components are passing this not in props there. So these are just variables. So now I can, instead of my counter, I can now use the teen crush value. So that's Nick Jonas, JB. All right. And then if I do the yo value, Nick Jonas had one, Justin Bieber didn't, so it's undefined. So the point here, you can pass whatever props you want, but you're going to want to have it's kind of like a function, like you're just going to want to make sure, if one of them doesn't get past a certain one and the other one doesn't, you're handling it properly. And you can call these whatever, but if I have a counter, I'm going to want to have the names be consistent when I'm using them. Like I don't want to have teen crush here and teen crushes there. Like you're going to want the prop, it's like a key in an object. You're going to want to have that consistency. Because yeah, if I change this name, then well, I don't get the value. Cool. Questions on that?
So can you go back to your counter file really quick?
Yeah. I'm going to get rid of that one so it's not. That's just going to be undefined if it can't find it. And if you do ES60 structuring and it's not in the object, it'll just default the value to undefined.
So would you change props to, you could use that, you could change that to X if you wanted to, right?
Yeah.
All props, okay.
But you should never call this anything other than props.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, you can call it whatever you want, but you can't.
Yeah.
It's kind of, yeah, one of those things. Another thing that is very acceptable to do is, this is just a object, and with JavaScript, we can destructure the keys right there. That is definitely something you'll see done. So that is acceptable. I'm probably going to avoid doing that for now, but you might see me do it. Cool. So there's our counter. So there we talked about state, props. We can now do reusability of a component, because here's like one of the, and I'm going to get rid of this yo, but one of the nice things about this is, so this counter component, maybe this is this is kind of a little more complicated, right? We have some state, we're doing plus minus, but when we reuse this is really easy to use. All I need to do is get my counter component and then just give it a name. I don't know this guy's name. Who's the NSYNC guy? Is it Timberlake?
Yeah.
The Rock is not really a team crush, but anyway. So now I can like reuse these components really easily, and my code is like really readable, and they have this like built-in function. So now I can do a little voting app on that. So there's the magic of React. Any questions on that?
Can I see your yo here where you put the thing?
Yo here.
Or Y here. File, the here JS.
No, the here JS file.
Oh, so that's all you did.
Cool. Oh, we kind of went a little long. Let's take a break. Since we went a little long, I'll give you an extra 5 minutes, but let's come back at 11:05. Stick around for a second if there's questions, and I'll also create a repo for this and push it up.